Yulia Sion. I am a researcher and industry expert in haptics and wearable technology. Today, I will be discussing the psychophysics of touch and how we communicate emotions through skin. And my speaker today is Greg Gerling. Greg is a professor of systems and information engineering at the University of Virginia, courtesy appointments in mechanical and biomedical engineering. His research interests include haptics, computational neuroscience, biomechanics, and human-computer interaction. Greg is currently the chair of the IEEE Technical Committee on Haptics and an associate editor for IEEE Transactions on Haptics. Long intro, lots of stuff done. Hello, Greg.
Hello, Yulia.
How are you today?
I'm great. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining me and talking to me about psychophysics of touch. I'm very curious because you do lots of fundamental research on touch, actually, which is super interesting because I have a feeling as a researcher myself in haptics, there is a lot we don't know yet. We'll touch upon this in some of the questions that I have for you. But usually I start my conversations by actually asking people why they do haptics in the first hand, right? Because there are not so many hapticians. And so same question goes to you. Please tell us why haptics, why research in this particular field?
Yeah. So haptics, and when I talk about haptics, I mean Haptics Symposium and World Haptics Conference and Asia Haptics and Euro Haptics. It's a really welcoming community. And I kind of got sucked into it, maybe in part because it's such a welcoming community. And maybe I'll just tell you a little story at the beginning.
Sure, I love stories.
So I was at the 2005 inaugural conference, World Haptics, and I didn't know that at the time, actually. I was a PhD student, and I was doing work studying the skin and the microstructures in the skin. And I attended that conference, and I look out into the audience, and this researcher, Srinivasan, and I always read in his papers, M.A. Srinivasan, was sitting right in front of me in a crowd of about 500 people. And I knew everything about all his papers. And at the end of my talk, he actually asked a question, and I couldn't believe it. He asked a question because he was kind of my hero at the time. And then I left that talk and I walked out, and Ed Colgate talked to me, and Ed Colgate introduced me to Vincent Hayward. And I couldn't believe it because within 5 minutes, I knew now kind of the top people in that field, and they were so accessible to me. You know, as we know, Vincent Hayward passed away this year. And he was such a luminary, but more importantly, he was just such a nice person who could relate with you. And later on in other conferences thereafter, I started meeting people like Hong Tan, Lynette Jones, and Alison Okamura, Marcio Mao, and they're also welcoming. So I think that in part that community is part of the big reason why I'm in haptics, because it's such a welcoming community. They bring people in, and it's such a diverse community in terms of interests and regions of the world. And I love all that.
But you mentioned you did your PhD also something related to touch. Am I correct?
Yeah, my PhD was related to touch. I looked at skin microstructures, and in particular, the ridges that are basically the ridge that's opposite the papillary, the skin ridges that you see, the fingerprints. And I studied how those ridges can influence propagation of stress through the skin, and how that might account, those ridges, that structure might actually enhance sensation.
It was not even related yet to human-computer interaction, right? It's more fundamental research on touch.
Right, that's right. That's right.
So why touch then, before you met this wonderful community, which indeed is?
The very first project I had as a graduate student, so basically there's clinical breast examinations are done, which are palpation exams to find nodules and tumors. And the very first project I had was to try to build basically a silicon model that you could move around the kind of tumors and masses in there. And that was the very first thing I worked on, was to build it was a simulator basically for training purposes. And I started to notice that I couldn't figure out why some people are so good and why some people are so poor. And it led me to looking at the finger and what are the differences we have individually, and what are the structures that could influence how we're perceiving these masses in the first place. And, trying to understand the person's perception as a way to design a system that can meet their needs. And that's how
Mhm.
I got more and more into haptics.